It starts by picking the right disease to fake. You know the classics: colds, earaches, pink eye, and the ever-popular diarrhea. Pete had tried all those. It was time for something big.
Food poisoning? That's a triple Yui.
Unusual, unpredictable, undetectable. Gets me 2 days, easy.
Near the end of the second season of The Adventures of Pete and Pete, the character of Artie, the strongest man in the world, made his departure from the show in the two-parter Farewell, My Little Viking. It was quite the tearjerker that changed the status quo quite a bit. Artie was a headline character. And for most television shows, that would be the season finale, a big emotional moment to close that chapter of the show. However, Season 2 would go on for 2 more episodes, a Big Pete episode and a Little Pete episode. And I think, in part, that was to establish that the show could still work, even without Artie. We covered one of those 2 episodes already on Sample Platter, Yellow Fever, a Big Pete episode that threatened to also change the status quo with a big blowout between Pete and his best friend Ellen, but then settled things down, calmed any anxieties you might have that everything was going to change now. The second of these 2 episodes had an even bigger challenge. Could a Little Pete-centered episode work without his personal superhero by his side? Originally airing on December 4th, 1994, Sick Day is the 13th and final episode of The Adventures of Pete and Pete's second season, the 21st episode overall, 26th if you're counting the specials. The episode was written by Michael Rubner, who's a Nickelodeon mainstay, working as a writer and producer on shows from Welcome Freshmen to The Loud House. The episode was directed by Maggie Greenwald, an independent film director probably best known at the time for the gender western The Ballad of Little Joe. School has found itself in that 2-month-ish dead zone between President's Day and Easter. No breaks, kids bored to death, even if their teacher is LL Cool J. Little Pete needs a break, and so starts plotting a way to get out of school for a day or 2. Ah, the sick day. Those unexpected breaks where you get to stay home, relax, and watch The Price is Right on the couch. But faking one is a challenge. It's going to take some effort to convincingly fake some food poisoning to trick mom, with some top-notch acting and some locally sourced expired tapioca. Hey, it's Velocity Girl frontwoman Sarah Shannon.
Remember, if you get busted, this never happened.
What never happened?
Bingo.
Little Pete gets his sick day, and while you and I may be satisfied just hanging out with Bob Barker, Pete wants to make an adventure of it. After getting a cereal piece shaped like former US President Dwight D. Eisenhower stuck up his nose, this show is very silly, Pete decides to break the one rule of faking a sick day and goes outside. Along the way, he comes across many of Wellsville's weirdo adults. The mail woman writing her memoirs, the bus driver just hanging around with nothing to do until school ends, the meter man who can see visions of the future.
Do you have a bomb shelter?
No. Why?
Don't worry about it.
Pete then takes on the ultimate sick day challenge, sneaking back to school. There, Little Pete notices a kid he never really paid attention to, Glenn, just some boy that eats black candy all day. It turns out Little Pete and Glenn have a lot more in common than the young boy realized, including getting breakfast marshmallow presidents stuck up their noses.
Hey, isn't that Eisenhower? Yeah, it is. I don't know how we got up there.
Yeah, I got Harry Truman stuck up my nose once.
Really? How'd you get him out?
Static electricity. I just rubbed my feet on a rug, touched the doorknob, and fired.
Really? That works?
Yeah, just the other day I had to blast out.
Martin Van Buren?
Yeah, Van Buren. How'd you know?
Just a guess.
This show is very silly. While I do think there are many better episodes of this show, Sick Day might just be the most ideal episode of The Adventures of Pete and Pete. It touches on all of the core elements that makes the program unique and special. A story that dramatizes a common experience for young people? Check. A cast of quirky characters living in the margins? Check. An appeal to empathy, to getting to really know the people around you, even if they seem a little strange? Check. The struggle between kids and grown-ups? Check. In fact, my favorite gag of this episode is how the school staff reacts to Little Pete not being in class that day.
Attention, all faculty members. Attention, all faculty members. Kalui Amatutu. Repeat, Kalui Amatutu. Don Ho will not emerge from the Valley of Darkness.
In other words, Sick Day feels like a reset, taking things back to the baseline Pete and Pete experience and showing its audience that you can do that without Artie. While Artie was over the top and very fun, the actual contrast to other adult characters was never that strong because most of the grown-ups in Wellsville were goofballs too. Stu the bus driver and Frank the crossing guard were less overtly cartoony, but they were still very silly, overdramatic, and hung out with the child characters fairly often. Pete's dad once built a burp room in the house, and Pete's mom has a metal plate in her head that can reflect garage door opener signals. And don't even get me started with Mr. Tasty. But Artie's relationship with Little Pete wasn't just being the silly adult, it was about giving Little Pete the confidence to go on adventures, stand up to authority, and challenge the system. This is what made him different from all of those grown-ups trying to drive him out of town. They may be ridiculous adults, but they are also authority figures. Artie and Little Pete stood up to that authority. And you're a lot braver when you know a personal superhero has your back. But as Artie observed at the end of Farewell My Little Viking, Little Pete has found that bravery within himself, and no longer needs Artie to have these kind of adventures.
Everything you need to learn is in here. Out there is some boy who needs me. He's small. He's puny, like he were.
Sick Day is essentially Little Pete riding his bike without training wheels for the first time, showing us that he can be just as clever, just as brave, just as devious, just as compassionate now as he was when Artie was around. That the show still works perfectly well without Artie. That the things that made Artie special have now been gifted to Little Pete. Of course, Little Pete's solo adventures did not become the norm. As Season 3 pivoted to being more Little Pete focused, he would find himself with an expanding supporting cast of kids who would go on these adventures with him. Kids who might not have gone on these adventures if Little Pete wasn't there. In a way, Little Pete started to fill the role Artie left behind. Of course, this is reading within a context of the series as a whole, a metatextual reading that isn't really drawn from the episode itself, but its place within the season. At no point is Artie's name ever mentioned. At no point is Little Pete reflecting on how he's matured. The Adventures of Pete never really banked on having finales, and Sick Day surely doesn't feel like one. Heck, reruns could shuffle this episode into anywhere it wanted, even before Farewell My Little Viking, and it wouldn't feel out of place. There were no rules saying Artie had to show up in every episode. On its own, removed from that context, Sick Day is a decent B- episode of the show. But I do believe that an episode's order matters, that where an episode is put in a series can mean a lot, and Sick Day is a perfect example of this, ending Season 2 with a promise that things may change, but the adventures will never stop. Of course, that's Sick Day from the context of Farewell My Little Viking. There's many contexts to be had, many angles you can approach a work from, as I hope the Knacks episode on the Adventures of Pete demonstrated. This, more than ever, was just a sample.